our continent and to avoid conflicts is economic interdependence and political interdependence. And we've seen that this is not true. Today we see that the dependence on Russia for energy is bringing war back on our continent. And we also see that freedom is not an acquis communautaire, as we see in the European books on integration. We also see that things have changed for us as a generation, and we also face new challenges, opportunities. And this is actually everything that we try to develop as a Young Security Conference. This 4th edition has a special title, as you see, When Empires Strike Back. And hopefully those who like Star Wars know why we choose this title, but not only, obviously, it's also because we live in this incredible time where we face empires that strike back. And it's not only because Europe is a post-imperial and anti-imperial project, and it is not only because we have lived actually 20, 30 years in freedom and in peace, apparently for us, on this side of the world. At the heart of the Young Security Conference is a simple and yet profound belief to bridge gaps, to democratize participation and decision-making processes from the bottom up. But it is also to develop an open platform, as I just mentioned, for exchange between academia and policy, young professionals and young scholars. And why is this so important? Actually, our work, which is based on the daily efforts of volunteers within our NGO, is that we try not only to empower younger generations and our fellows that gather here today in Munich, and also our networks from former generations, former fellows that joined our team, is also to foster this long-term network between policy and academia, and that we find new ways how to work together, not only over the Atlantic and within Europe, but also between our disciplines, and that we really truly can find ways how to work in an interdisciplinary way, and that we try to tackle the generational challenges that we're facing right now. So very shortly, regarding the way how we work is actually twofold. So we have the YSC Fellowship on the one hand, so we have our dear fellows seated here in this room today. The fellowship works thanks to our donors, our partners, the Franco-German Youth Office, the Franco-German University, the Hertie Foundation, and the Neumann Stiftung, among others, obviously, who work with us on content. But the fellowship program actually enables us to foster a new network around specific topics that we try to discuss on the long term, not only within our network, but also during this conference and other events that we're organizing during the year. So we actually try not only to build a stronger and more inclusive Europe and a stronger West in general, but also to integrate to the East, obviously, in Europe, and to bring Ukrainians here now to talk with us about these challenges that we are trying to tackle. And very shortly, regarding our history of our NGO, it all started in Paris, actually, and this also explains why this organization is also Franco-German somehow, when I worked for a think tank in Paris back then. And I thought it is such a crucial and important thing that our generation starts again working together with fellow peers and colleagues, and it's so hard in these times to find other people, to work on common projects, to write together, to find opportunities for publications, etc., etc. So this actually leads me to the other editions that we organized here at the America House. So this is the 3rd time that we are here, and I thank again the America House, Markus Faltermeyer, and the entire team that actually we can organize this conference here and many other events. The 1st edition also happened here in Munich on the roof of the Technische Universität, and it was a kind of a very academic setting. which was very nice, but it was not as open as it is today. And I can say actually, I'm really proud, and I can say that I'm really happy today that I can also announce that our board members now extended to 4, and our entire team is amazing. We're working here during days and days to allow this to happen. We are 15 members now within our NGO, and we are working from all over Europe. And yes, this is the 4th edition with the title, When Empires Strike Back. But as Professor Stetter yesterday mentioned, for those who were here in Munich for the fellow session, the Jedis are not far. And that's the most important lesson that we have to keep in mind. And now I want to introduce my colleague Vitus Tervier. He is head of academia, to explain a little bit more about the program and how everything comes together during these 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As we're a bit short on time, so I'm trying to be as concise as possible. I just want to say like 2-3 sentences about the academia department before I briefly go into the panels that we await today and tomorrow. So the department has more or less conceptualized this year's conference that Amelie already discussed, but also outside the conference, we ask ourselves which topics should be paid more attention to, and why certain topics in the dominant discourse are of lesser importance. And those which are coming short, we want to foster and encourage young minds to write also policy briefs, essays with us, and this is where we as an organization also want to grow still. And the panels today shall also reflect this ambition, and Amelie already explained what we had on our minds when conceptualizing it, and obviously there's this overarching problem that we have in Europe these days, and therefore it was clear to us that we want to devote the war against Ukraine to our conference. Our first panel starting after Dr. Neumann's keynote speech, and it delves into the EU's Eastern neighborhood and its failed policy. The war also has shown that neighboring states to the EU may not be as committed to what we think we strive for as the EU, and also what we EU citizens think. And there's one country that is particularly showing this ambivalence between Russia and the EU, and that is Serbia. So therefore the question, is Serbia a friend or foe? The second panel today anticipates the hopefully soon time when the war is over and critically engages with both the Ukrainian society as well as the Western illusions about a future which may a liberal Ukraine in the Western world order be. And the third and last panel today, this afternoon, also tries to escape this dominant discourse on nuclear weapons, especially at times of war in Europe, including nuclear powers. And we want to ask, is there a way to break with the conventional thinking and proliferation and to transform disarmament into policy making? And tomorrow then, we'll start with a panel on democratic backsliding, where we want to embrace the interdisciplinarity of security studies, because political freedom and democracy and international relations are inseparable, especially in times of war. Tomorrow's second panel then follows the idea of disunity both within the EU and NATO, and in fact between both. There is movement in both organizations, and there seems to be a sort of renaissance in the latter. And but what shall we actually do with this development? And is there room for improvement when it comes to hybrid threats? And now with that, I have the utmost pleasure to invite Dr. Hannah Neumann on stage and to deliver her keynote speech. Thank you very much.
morning. Good to see you. I'm happy, first of all, to see so many people in the room so early in the day. And I'm happy to see so many young people in the room. And the funny thing is, with me coming from Brussels, you are actually kind of young until you are 50. So if you struggle at one point in your life with your actual age, I can only warmly recommend you to start working in Brussels, because it gives you an additional 20 years of being young for sure if you are a woman in defense. I assume that most of you, or I would say part of you, come from Germany or countries further to the west in the European Union, which means you have grown up in a European Union without borders, or at least experienced how you do not need any more passports, how you do not need any more to change currencies. You're used to the fact that the big decisions are actually made in Brussels and then implemented in the member states. You're used to a world after the Cold War, in a world of superpowers or wannabe superpowers, where it's quite clear that EU member states, individually or by themselves, are quite dwarfs in comparison to the big empires or the big powers, or however you want to call them. And I guess you find it quite anachronistic, at least it's quite anachronistic for me, that exactly the two key fields where you shape your role in the world and the future of the world, which are foreign and defense policies, still remain on member states level. And we don't do that together as the EU, whilst we do most other things together at the EU. Or you come a bit further from the east, so Eastern Germany and further east, which means that you have quite a vivid memory of the aggressivity of the Soviet Union, later on Russia, against wishes towards more independence. You can somehow relate closer to the experience that Ukrainians face right now. You may have had the privilege yourself to celebrate actually how your country has joined the European Union. I remember about 20 years ago when we stood in Frankfurt Oder, where Poland actually joined the European Union. It felt like things are coming together that belong together for a long time, and it's kind of the same hopes that we have for Ukraine these days. And I guess if you come from this more eastern part of the European Union, you are quite sure to say that defending against an aggressor as powerful as Russia, militarily as well as economically, can't be done alone. So you might be a bit puzzled looking at the nationalistic turf battles happening in Brussels again right now, with member states talking about European autonomy, member states talking about European sovereignty. There are many more buzzwords basically meaning the same thing, while continue to act largely along nationalist reflexes when it comes to truly European defense. And if that is the case, I can just say, I feel you. And that's why I decided to speak today about the frustrations of EU defense as it is now, and the possible future of a truly European defense and security union, or to stay basically in the framework of the title of these countries, how can we get the Yedis to become a real force? It's going to start technical, though. The EU has different decision-making competencies. So basically, when is the nation state in charge, when is the EU in charge, or when is both together? There are areas of exclusive competence of the EU, for example, custom, competition policies. There are areas of shared competences, for example, climate, transport, energy. There are areas of supporting competences, such as education and tourism. And then there is foreign and security policy. And if you ask why exactly those two are excluded, if these are the areas where we would need close cooperation and shared competences maybe the most in the world of today, most people that I ask this question refer to the special role that military has for national identity, They refer to the experiences of the Second World War. And you can already hear it in my tone. I'm not very convinced that this is why it has to stay like this forever. For sure, the reasons why we are still doing that on national level are reasons going back to an era that has long passed, but it persists until today. And I can tell you, having been a member of European Parliament for 4 years now, that it leads to sometimes very cumbersome moments. And I'm just going to share a few examples. I was in Egypt. In Egypt, well, there are issues with human rights, especially human rights defenders often end up in prisons. So I met with ambassadors from 2 big member states' embassies and asked them, so do you raise these cases? And they would say, no, that's the EU taking care of human rights. That's not how it works. Or we have the civil war in Libya. And there we had for a long time France, including with weapons going through third parties, supporting one side of the conflict, Italy supporting the other side of the conflict, Germany being tasked on behalf of the EU in the Berlin process to find an end to this kind of conflict, European Union mission in the Mediterranean trying to enforce the arms embargo, while Airbus planes are still used by Turkey to undermine the arms embargo and we continue the maintenance of this one. How on earth, with this mess, can you stand up against empires? How on earth can you make an EU foreign policy if you have to deal with this mess? And just one most recent example, after the Russian invasion into Ukraine, we had an energy problem because we were, for sure the Germans, highly dependent on Russian gas and oil. So we had to find different solutions. So we had the German Minister of Economy traveling to Qatar to ask for gas. Then we had the French president traveling to Qatar to ask for gas. Well, what did the Qataris do? Who's paying more? And then we had the situation in the summer that the French were actually sending us French gas that we made into electricity that we then sent back to French because their nukes didn't work. Their nuclear power plants didn't work. Why don't we just do that together? And now we are running into the same situation because all EU member states are stepping up, and they need to do that, their defense budgets. And Ukraine needs a lot of equipment and support, ammunition, battle tanks, all of that. So either now, we say who needs how many helicopters, who needs how much ammunition. We pool this information. And then we go to the arms industry and say, we have this huge demand. Who's going to give it to us fastest and cheapest? And then we make a strategy on who needs it first on our side. That would be the proper way, right? Well, I can tell you what's happening. We are competing again. The arms industry is making a fortune, and we have less security for that. But what we... Let me go. And then, of course, I mean, you can imagine we're having this discussion. Why are we doing it like that? Why are we not doing defense together? And the response I get is because it's not in the treaties. Because in the treaties, it's security and defense, and foreign policy is member states' business. But we actually also saw, after the Russian aggression into Ukraine, that it can be done differently in some areas. We were quite well set when it comes to sanctions. And I can tell you, everyone in the European Union was surprised, even in Brussels, how fast our initial response was, how united it was, and what an impact it had. I'm not saying that all of that is perfect, but it was, for European Union standards, quite something. Then we built up the European Peace Facility, which was, again, an ad hoc tool, very pragmatic, very fast, that did 2 things. First of all, it coordinated the demands of the Ukrainians. So Ukrainians went to one central spot. They said, that's what we need. And we tried to figure out amongst us who can supply what. So Ukrainians did no longer have to go from member state to member state with lists. And I mean, with 27 member states, you can imagine how much this runs into a chaos. And actually, I mean, their capacities are needed somewhere else, which is on the battlefield and not negotiating in European capitals. So we had this facility where they sent their list, and we then checked what we can supply. and we financed in solidarity. So not the country that was supplying something had to come up for the costs, but there was the usual solidarity mechanism, so every member state, according to its economic strengths, puts in money in the pot, and that's from where we buy it, and where we reimburse the member states, depending on how much they send. This thing is called the clearinghouse, and now with the European Peace Facility, we also do, and here again, we really combine the strength of the member states to training of Ukrainians for battle, especially for the highly technical equipment that we are sending them. And here again, it's Poland and it's Germany who have like the head, but it's all other member states, be it with 15 trainers, be it with 200 trainers, it doesn't matter, but we even allow the smallest ones to contribute by having this way, and here again, we do it together and it works. And these two examples clearly show that if member states want to work together, if they want to pool resources, if they want to make decisions together, they can be fast and they can be united. And it is possible to do things truly European beyond the treaties, because the treaties just say you're not forced to do it, but it doesn't say you're not allowed to do it. And this is exactly the discussion of political will that we now have to start, because frankly said, it starts to fall apart again. On the sanctions, we're having debates again between those countries that are much closer, who want to have more sanctions, those countries that are further away from Ukraine, that are a bit more reluctant. We have the issue of joint procurement. I just explained it to you, with everyone stepping up the defense budgets. And now the question is, do we procure together? Or do we go back to member state staff? And there I can tell you it is quite a painful experience. For me, maybe the most characteristic moment was when our new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, who I think does a brilliant job, when it comes to the ammunition procurement, the joint European ammunition procurement and stepping up the capabilities, he went to the media in these famous doorsteps when you were in Brussels, and he said, okay, we are going to do joint European procurement in the framework of German framework agreements with the defense industry. And that's exactly the problem. So Germany has a framework agreement, and now he's going to allow smaller member states to also become part of that under German conditions. That's not what I mean with European. And that's why we're discussing this DROI thing, which should do joint procurement, now for 12 months. And the amount that is in it is going to get smaller and smaller. The technical debates are getting bigger and bigger. Rather than we say what we do with the European Peace Facility with supplying Ukraine with weapons, we are going to do that with all the procurement that we want, which would be the normal way. But we also have the problem that when EU member states, and they start doing joint production like FGAS, all these abbreviations, the joint fighter jet, or they want to do joint battle tanks, or they are in the process of doing also joint ships like marine components. The problem is these are not European projects. These are binational, trinational, multinational projects, but it's always member states negotiating with each other. It's not, we make it a European thing. And we run into cumbersome protectionism where member states don't share information. There's a process, it's called CARD, Coordinated Annual Review of Defense. It started about 4 years ago. It's a good idea. Member states say, what capacities do we have? Where do we have a gap? How do we intend to fill that gap? They all report it to the European Defense Agency. And then the European Defense Agency kind of says, how does it fit together, basically? So when we had the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and everyone found out we don't have enough capacities, of course, we in the European Parliament invited EDA to come and explain it to us. The problem was all member states had just submitted blank papers because they don't want to share this information with each other. And that's why the whole process needed to start, and it took these exact 12 months where we are now. Everyone wants to keep their key technologies. So you think it's smart, right? The French basically build the fighter jet, and the other one builds the ship, and the next one builds the tank, or two countries do it together, so as a Europe we have everything. Sadly, that's not how it works, because the French, for their force de frappe, they need everything. The Germans Each member of the German parliament has a constituency. If the key technology is in their constituency, they are not going to give it up. So the Germans somehow also need everything. And then we have this whole issue of where do you buy? The Polish want to do a lot with the US, the French insist on buy European, and we are running into the same circles since 40 years of everyone talking cooperation, and then it's falling apart because no one's willing to give anything up. It's just the abbreviations changing, frankly said. And I mean, I could continue this list forever, believe me. But down the line, we remain united in competition. And while Russian troops try to burn down Ukraine and our friends are fighting for their lives, for their homes, and for their country, we continue basically internally with this finger-wiggling competition stuff. And we are stuck, and that's maybe the most frustrating part for me as a member of the European Parliament. We are stuck between a talk of European sovereignty, European autonomy. So that's the talk. I mean, everyone has these words. But an action that is actually continuing to be somehow nationalist and protectionist. And there are maybe some small baby steps towards European, but they really don't live up to the challenge that we are facing with Russia in Ukraine right now. And the interesting thing is whenever someone comes, and of course Macron is the first one, but not the only one speaking about European autonomy and sovereignty in Parliament, I say, okay, sounds good, I'm all in for it. What area of national competence are you willing to transfer to the European level so that we can actually build that sovereignty? So far, no one gave me an answer. And I really wonder if the Russian invasion is not enough to change this thinking. What else could it be? And as a politician, it is super difficult to deal with this. Because, I mean, if you want to plan, if you want to build a proper security and defense for the European Union, you can either work with the assumption that every member state does their own stuff, and then you try to figure out how you can best puzzle it together, and if you need to close one or two gaps. Or you can plan with, we do it together as a European Union. But politically, you can't build a proper security infrastructure based on, we want to do it European, but we don't. Because what do you work with? And of course, I still have to work with that, because that's the reality. But from a security perspective, from a management perspective, from an economic perspective, we could save so much money. There are thousands of studies how much money only we can save if we work together. But also from a political perspective, what we're doing right now is bluntly said stupid. And in the world of today, we can't afford competition between member states, national protectionism, and an unconsolidated defense industry anymore. Still, I have some hope. The economic crisis made us grow closer together in the finance sector in the European Union because we had to. The COVID crisis made us grow closer together in the health sector. And we are working on key tasks to increase, for example, our European autonomy when it comes to delivery chains, because we had to. The energy crisis last winter made us grow closer together in the energy sector because we had to. So I haven't given up hope that the Russian invasion into Ukraine is the much-needed wake-up call for the defense sector. But the key steps ahead, they need to come from the capitals. They need to come from the governments in the member states. They need to be willing to voluntarily give up some of their protectionist thinking, some of their competencies, and transfer it to European entities to make this work. I'm not going to say it will be easy, but what I'm saying is it is necessary. This problem will not go away, and that's also why I brought this here today. I'm counting on you, the young ones, to make it happen. I would say let's embrace the lesson our Ukrainian friends are teaching us these days. We are indeed stronger together. Thank you.
we continue shortly with the panel on Serbia and Eastern enlargement.